Katarina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katarina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Good evening and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for January 13th, 2022 with Chris Driscoll, that's me, and Brainer Shea, that's the other fella sitting across from me here. Actually, several hundred miles across, but still, you get the idea. First on the list today, the Red Hill disaster. 2 Hawaiian activists discussed the latest episode in 2 centuries of colonialism. In November, a huge underground naval fuel storage facility at Red Hill near Honolulu burst, leaking 14,000 gallons of jet fuel, contaminating the water supply, poisoning scores of people, and driving thousands of Hawaiian families from their homes. The state's Attorney General, David Day, has alleged that the military has essentially no control over the safety of the enormous depot, which holds 250 million gallons of fuel. Day remarked that the state had a ticking time bomb on its hands and that further contamination of its precious water supply was all but inevitable. The tanks sit just feet above the island's largest aquifer. And this incident is merely the latest in a long list showing the American empire's callous disregard for the civilian population of Hawaii, as it puts military needs before the people or the environment. Joining Loki today for are 2 Hawaiian activists, Ihilani Lascania and Daniel Kuila Mahi, Ihilani is an artist, singer, and organizer from the Waimanalo, from Waimalano. Daniel is a musician, rapper, and student from Honolulu. The two place the latest disaster in the context of centuries of American imperialism, which sees Hawaii as a strategic location for control over the Pacific. The United States overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893 and formally annexed the islands in 1898. From there, it became a linchpin in the US expansion across the Pacific and the conquest of the Philippines, Guam, and other territories, serving as an important military launchpad. There are 11 military bases on Oahu alone, including the enormous Pearl Harbor, the headquarters of the US Pacific Command. So militarized have the islands become that around 1 in 10 of all Hawaiian residents are servicemen and women. It's not just the guns and bombs, Lascania told Loki, noting that the military has even tested depleted uranium shells at its bases, leading to locals developing cancer. This is just the tip of the iceberg of being at the ground zero for the American war machine, she added. The deep-seated racism towards the indigenous population is something that native Hawaiians can feel every day. Lascania noted that this latest contamination was far from an isolated incident. Fuel tanks have been leaking for decades now, she said, but it is because this time it affected predominantly white people on the US base that they are doing something about it. Kuila Mahi noted that the increased critical coverage of the incident is also prompted by the negative consequences it has for the state's two other sectors of power, the tourism and real estate industries, which do not wish to see further environmental degradation. He sees this as an opportunity to use the Red Hill disaster as a wedge issue to strike back at the excessive militarism on display throughout the islands. Ihilani and Daniel are among a new generation of leaders challenging the empire, although they see themselves as a part of a long tradition. Hawaiians have always opposed militarization throughout Hawaii, Lasconia said. However, she expects no help from the local elected officials who do not have the power to speak out against the military for fear of reprisals. It's not a government, it's not a democracy, it's essentially a mafia state run by terrorists who don't hurt just Hawaii, but indigenous people across the world, she told Loki.
You know, another way to describe that is military junta. I mean, that's essentially what the situation is across the rest of what's called America, where you have what's been described as the fiscal military state. That's how it's described in this book I'm reading right now called Not a Nation of Immigrants. It's about the genocide, erasure, and settler colonialism on this continent. And it lays out how the fiscal military state has been pivotal towards colonization, towards the establishment of a paradigm of permanent warfare. This is the context that we need to acknowledge when we talk about the history of U.S. imperialism, because it's not just been during these last 20 years that the U.S. has been at war. It's it's in a sense been for the entire history of the United States, and that war continuously has been against colonized peoples. There's a war going on not just against the indigenous First Nations, but against the African nation, against the Chicano nation. This war takes subtler forms than the forms that we've been alarmed about during these last couple decades, but that war has been present.
Yes, well put. Okay, next on the list, Russia reacts angrily to Blinken's comments on Kazakhstan. This comes to us from Reuters. Russia responded angrily on Saturday to a comment by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that Kazakhstan might have a hard time getting rid of Russian troops, saying he should reflect instead on the U.S. military meddling around the world. Blinken on Friday challenged Russia's justification for sending forces to Kazakhstan after days of violent unrest in the Central Asian country. Russia's foreign ministry called Blinken's remarks typically offensive and accused him of joking about tragic events in Kazakhstan. It said Washington should analyze its own track record of interventions in countries such as Vietnam and Iraq. If Antony Blinken loves history lessons so much, then he should take the following into account. When the Americans are in your house, it can be difficult to stay alive and not be robbed or raped, the military said on its Telegram social media channel. We are taught this not only by the recent past, but by all 300 years of American statehood. The ministry said the deployment in Kazakhstan was a legitimate response to Kazakhstan's request for support from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, an alliance of ex-Soviet states that includes Russia.
You know, the more news I hear about Kazakhstan, the more foolish I realize both of us looked just last week when we were still dismissing the idea that it's a color revolution, that it's anything besides imperialist intervention. I mean, there's still nuance to be articulated, and I think you had the more correct understanding at the time. You said that it's a color revolution that is made possible by the internal fascistic dynamics within Kazakhstan. And there are definitely parallels to the Euromaidan movement, which is extremely chilling. When the Euromaidan took power, a genocide immediately kicked off within Ukraine, a war that's ongoing, one of the worst wars in the world, immediately kicked off. So I'm getting more and more anxious about how this is going to end up. Is Washington going to succeed in installing another fascist regime within that part of the world? And what's going to happen if they do?
Yeah, as things have developed, it's become much more clear that there's a lot more American involvement in this than we had first thought. The next story I'm going to talk about is the Kazakh president and his speech on Friday, where he revealed a lot more about this. It was a very, very serious terrorist attack, included 20,000 terrorists. So it was not a small thing. So far, the Kazakh state, along with help from the Russian military and the organization of former Soviet states called the Collective Security Treaty Organization, have the situation basically settled for the time being. But we don't know what the American side and the indigenous fascists in Kazakhstan have prepared for the future. So this could turn out to be something far more than just an uprising of 20,000 fascist terrorists. It could turn out to be civil war in Kazakhstan if they don't watch out. The Collective Security Treaty Organization still has troops there, and I'm betting that they will have troops there for a good long time to keep an eye on the situation. So we'll see how it turns out. Blinken, of course, is coming out looking like a fool in all this, saying the things that he did, considering the 300-year history of American American imperialism, even prior to the actual establishment of the United States of America. These were an imperialist people, and they're doing the same thing today. This time around, they have the help of quite a large number of Kazakh fascist terrorists to help them out. There is still the indigenous aspect of this, which these people, you're really correct. These people are very similar in nature to what we saw in 2014 in Ukraine. So we'll really have to keep our eye out for this. Next on the list, update on the Kazakh crisis and hybrid warfare. President Tokayev addressed his people on Friday, and that's the president of Kazakhstan, in a speech that exposed details of the terrorist threat facing his nation. The first point of importance is that he authorized the army to shoot to kill without warning. This shows that the state is serious about neutralizing the terrorist threat. Previous attempts to have them surrender have largely failed, since these radicals choose to fight to the death instead. Precisely because of the fact that they are terrorists is why President Tokayev refuses to negotiate with them, like he claimed some foreign forces have called upon him to do. The next item to touch on from his speech is how he thanked several countries in particular for their support, including Turkey. There's been wild speculation among many in the alt media community, alleging that Turkey was somehow involved in the attempted terrorist takeover of that Central Asian country. President Tokayev quashed the rumors by thanking the Turkish president, among others. Those who continue to hurl baseless accusations against Turkey are therefore propagating fake news. Another intriguing point was made when President Tokayev opined about democracy and human rights. He reminded everyone that democracy isn't permissiveness nor incitement of illegal actions. The rule of law is the basis of all civilized states, he said. The lack of respect for the law leads to anarchy, which in return results in the violation of citizens' human rights. It's for this reason why the hybrid war of terror on Kazakhstan can be described as threatening that country's very statehood. The Kazakhstani leader also blamed so-called do-gooder activists who violated the May 2020 law on peaceful assemblies of citizens by holding unauthorized, illegal rallies for distracting the police from dealing with their country's urgent terrorist threat. President Tokayev said that this was one of the reasons why he temporarily shut down the internet in order to prevent these activists from undermining the state's ongoing anti-terrorist operations. Moving along, his speech then discussed the role of foreign media and domestic demagogues in catalyzing and exacerbating the current crisis. President Tokayev also declared that the government will investigate how everything happened in the first place so that attempted terrorist takeovers like the latest one never happen again. According to him, 20,000 armed and highly trained sleeper cell terrorists attacked Almaty, including some foreign ones alongside many locals. He concluded that this is evidence of a pre-planned attack against his country. Furthermore, President Tokayev revealed that the terrorists were greatly assisted by specialists trained in what he described as ideological sabotage. This vanguard force weaponized disinformation and fake news in order to manipulate the minds of many in the run-up to the crisis, and especially once it finally began to get kinetic. All of this suggests a single command center for training and guidance, he said. Everything that President Tokayev revealed in his speech confirms that Kazakhstan was indeed victimized by a hybrid war of terror. The fact that over 20,000 armed and highly trained sleeper cell terrorists, including some foreign ones, could infiltrate the country to carry out coordinated attacks all across, it shows how long this campaign has been planned. It's also important that he called out the informational component of this hybrid war since it played a crucial role in the conflict. The subversive anti-Russian faction of the US's permanent military, intelligence, and diplomatic bureaucracies, deep state, might have ordered this conflict's intensification in a desperate last-ditch attempt to sabotage the upcoming US-Russia talks on de-escalating the undeclared US-provoked missile crisis in Europe. That's because it could have been postponed due to the authorities giving in to the originally apolitical anti-reform color revolution protesters' demands to reimpose price controls. The public might not be made privy to the exact details for reasons of geopolitical sensitivity, but there shouldn't be any doubt that any extremely powerful force commanded the hybrid war that an extremely powerful force commanded the hybrid war of terror on Kazakhstan, exactly as President Tokayev concluded. That same force represents a major danger to the world, since it already provided itself or proved itself capable of almost capturing control of one of the most geographically largest countries in the span of just a single day, which is why this must be contained as soon as possible.
You know, a question that I feel like I'm going to need to get an answer for definitively before I make my analysis on Kazakhstan is whether the government itself provoked the unrest or whether it was something that just came out of the blue, created by these foreign subversives. Because it's true that the government there hiked up gas prices, and it's true that this comes from a encroaching neoliberal paradigm that's present despite Kazakhstan's ongoing status as partially Soviet adjacent in terms of its economic structure. So it's possible there's overarching conditions that have been at play that have allowed for this unrest to manifest.
Yeah, true, very true. Okay, the next point. Putin and Xi plot their swift escape. I'll just comment that the news is very Russia heavy this week. Vladimir Putin got straight to the point. At the opening of his 1 hour and 14-minute video conversation with Xi Jinping on December 15th, he described Russia-China relations as an example of genuine interstate cooperation in the 21st century. Their myriad levels of cooperation have been known for years now, from trade, oil and gas, finance, aerospace, the fight against COVID-19, to the progressive interconnection of the Belt and Road Initiative and Eurasia Economic Union. But now the stage was set for the announcement of a serious countermove in their carefully coordinated ballet, opposing the relentless hybrid war, Cold War 2.0 combo deployed by empire. An assistant to the president for foreign policy, Yuri Yushakov, succinctly explained, Putin and Xi agreed to create an independent financial structure for trade operations that could be influenced by other countries, or could not be influenced by other countries. Sorry about that. Diplomatic sources off the record confirm the structure may be announced by a joint summit before the end of 2022. This is a stunning game changer in more ways than one. It had been extensively discussed in previous bilaterals and in preparations for BRICS summits, mostly centered on increasing the share of the yuan and rubles in Russia-China settlements, bypassing the US dollar and opening new stock market options for Russian and Chinese investors. Now we've come to the crunch, and the catalyzing event was none other than the US hawks floating the financially nuclear idea of expelling Russia from SWIFT, the messaging network used by 11,000 banks in over 200 countries, as well as financial institutions for rapid money transfers worldwide. Cutting Russia off from SWIFT would be a part of a harsh new sanctions package developed in response to an invasion of Ukraine that will never happen, mainly because the only ones praying for it are the professional NATO warmongers. Once again, an American strategic blunder offers the Russia-China self-described comprehensive strategic partnership the chance to advance their coordination. Yushakov put it very diplomatically. It's time to bypass a SWIFT mechanism influenced by third countries to form an independent financial structure. That amounts to a serious game changer for the entire global South, as scores of nations yearn to be released from the de facto US dollar dictatorship, complete with recurring Fed quantitative easing circus packages. America is working alongside EU partners to halt certification of Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline and is encouraging Germany not to give in to official approval, the US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs has said. Speaking at a press briefing in Tuesday, Victoria Nuland also noted that Washington is considering further sanctions against the system if Russia were to invade Ukraine. Nord Stream 2 was completed in September, but is yet to be certified and has not yet begun operations. It directly connects Russia to Germany, cutting out any third-party countries, which could significantly lower the price of gas. Washington has repeatedly sanctioned the system, claiming that it threatens European energy security, while some have accused the US of cynically trying to stop the pipeline so it can sell liquefied natural gas to the continent. What we are doing now is working with the Germans, working with the EU to slow their consideration of the implementation of the pipeline, Nuland said. This German government has taken significant steps to do that, and they've also reaffirmed the agreement that we had, with the previous government with regard to what happens to Nord Stream 2, namely, it's suspended if Russia aggresses against Ukraine. Approval of the project, which could have come this month, was suspended in mid-November by the German Federal Network Agency, the Bundesnetzagentur, over a regulatory issue regarding the operator's lack of premises inside Germany. However, despite Berlin's description of the delay as simply an interim step, the US appears to be attempting to make it permanent. Earlier this week, influential German politician Michael Kretschmer, the Prime Minister of Saxony, suggested that America had derailed the controversial natural gas pipeline for its selfish economic reasons. That has preoccupied us all most in recent months. What has preoccupied us most of all in recent months is Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which has been tornadoed by the Americans for reasons of energy policy self-interest, Kretschmer said. A group of American Democratic Party senators has put together a new slate of potential economic sanctions against Russia, even as legislators are set to vote on a separate bill concerning the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The proposed legislation was drafted by a group led by Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Robert Mendez, the Washington Post reported on Wednesday, and would impose broad sanctions on top Russian officials, including President Vladimir Putin, in the event of an invasion of Ukraine. It would also target companies in Russia that offer messaging systems such as SWIFT, which banks use to securely exchange information. The bill makes it absolutely clear that the U.S. Senate will not stand idly by as the Kremlin threatens to a reinvasion of Ukraine, Mendez said to the Post. Putin need not collapse his entire economy, nor does he need to sacrifice the lives of his own people in a futile attempt to rewrite the map of Europe, the senator went on. National Security Council spokesperson Emily Horn told the Post that the proposed legislation has the support of the White House, which believes that a separate bill relating to Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, championed by Republican Senator Ted Cruz, will not counter further Russian aggression or protect Ukraine.
You know, there's something odd about this narrative that Russia is going to invade Ukraine, because they're using it as a threat. They're saying they're going to sanction Russia if it invades Ukraine, but they must know that that's not going to happen. So it seems like it's just a way to gain narrative leverage in this battle to stop Germany from acting in its own interests and going along with the pipeline, and to stop any other given country that Washington has leverage over from straying from the Cold War orthodoxy in any other given way. That's clearly the real purpose of these sanctions threats. The sanctions may not even need to be implemented for Washington to carry out its goals. It's like a bluff.
Yeah. Okay. Next on the list, the role of continuous warfare in the age of imperial decline. Rainer Shea.
There is an effect that has been felt within the southern half of Korea, the occupied half of Korea, as a consequence of the Korean War's continuation throughout the last several generations. The Korean War has still not actually ended, and this has let the U.S. Puppet government there implement a series of anti-communist repressive laws. They've made it illegal to say anything positive about the North, about socialist Korea. And this has made communist organizing negated in a similar way to how it's been negated by Indonesia's ban against communist organizing, since Indonesia became an anti-communist dictatorship in 1965. And the role that continuous warfare has had in this is providing the narrative precedent for anti-communism to become codified and for anti-communism to become proliferated so much culturally. The North is portrayed within the southern occupied half of Korea, as well as throughout the rest of the imperialist dominated sphere, as nothing more than a brutal dictatorship with nothing to learn from. And this creates a demobilization of the working class by depriving them of a working example of socialism that they can study in an honest way and then take example from in their own class struggles. And it's not illegal in the United States per se to praise North Korea, but it's not something that pretty much anyone is going to think of because of the presence of continuous warfare and the prevalence of war propaganda. The same goes for socialist China, for socialist Cuba, and for any other given country that the US is at odds with and that in any way deviates from the neoliberal model that Washington wants to impose upon every corner of the globe. And continuous warfare, which has intensified, as we've said, in these last couple of decades, has made this demobilization of class struggle through war-related narrative manipulation all the more prevalent.
Yeah. Coincidentally, I've been looking recently at the big picture of global protests over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And there's been an enormous uptick in the United States and everywhere else. The George Floyd protests, for example, were the largest protests ever seen in the United States of America, including 30 million people in just the first month. And they continued throughout the rest of 2020. So, I mean, for at least 8 or 9 months, you had George Floyd related anti-police state protests. And they caught on all over the world. And around the world, there were other protests unrelated to that. For instance, throughout Latin America, protests against neoliberalism. So there's been a huge uptick in just the last 2 or 3 years. But yeah, the continuous warfare has, for a long time, I mean, kind of been with us, and it has reshaped reality. We haven't seen big anti-war demonstrations throughout most of this period of time, during which continuous warfare has been taking place, carried out by the American empire. So yeah, it's definitely a big thing. Finally on our list tonight, imperialist psyops, social control, and making reality malleable. Rainer Shea.
There is this intriguing report that the Pentagon put out. I think it was 5 years ago. It's now been 5 years since they put it out. And it was made in response to the political upheaval in 2016, but also in response to all of the losses that US imperialism had already experienced by that point. It's concluded that US hegemony is rapidly declining, if not collapsing, and that the only way for the empire to retain the vitality of its capital is through doubling down on militarism, mass surveillance, and most of all, propaganda. They concluded that winning the information war is going to be crucial for keeping US capitalist interests alive in the coming decades as imperialism further deteriorates. And they created these categories for the different kinds of facts that the US empire, its media appendages, its official propagandists are going to need to address. These facts pertaining to things like US war crimes, like the reality of mass surveillance, like government corruption, uh, like uh, like the kinds of failures of governance that we've seen during these last couple of years with the pandemic. They described these. I'm going to try to recount these facts, these different types of facts that they list out verbatim. There's fact-free, which are facts that they claim are outright false. There's fact-toxic information, which they claim is information that is out of context. There's there's several other categories, but they all pertain to trying to delegitimize the very concept of what a fact is. They're trying to portray things like the war crimes that Assange and Manning revealed, or the mass surveillance that Snowden revealed, as fact perilous, for instance. That's another category. Fact perilous information is information that has been leaked and that is therefore supposed to be seen as not worth taking seriously. And the way that the imperialists have convinced many to not take these types of facts seriously is by portraying them as enemy propaganda. This was the purpose of the 2016 intelligence report. Remember the 17 intelligence agencies statement that they kept repeating, which claimed that Russia had given WikiLeaks the DNC emails exposing the rigging of the primaries. So they were trying to deflect from the corruption within that case by portraying the revelation of this corruption as enemy propaganda. And of course, a lot of people who bought into this could also make the association that, oh, if it's enemy propaganda, then it might not even be real at all. It could just be made up by the Russians. These are the kinds of ironically fact-free conclusions that the government is covertly encouraging people to come to.
Yeah. It's funny. The revelations about war crimes and ubiquitous global surveillance by the American empire. When that came out, and when they started putting out this line that, well, this was enemy propaganda and so forth, you know, that's the ultimate in diversion, because who cares where it comes from? The fact is that the Americans are doing these crimes. The American empire, the imperialists, are doing these crimes. It doesn't matter where the information came from. It could come from hell for all I'm concerned. That's point number one. Point number two is that it did come from internal leaks, not from the Russians, not from other sources. So, the whole thing is kind of, here's the thing. There's about 30% of Americans who are idiots. That's the way we should put it. They're just simply idiots. And they'll believe anything, and they'll go with anything. They're the same 30% who voted for Trump. That's not talking about the more intelligent people who voted for Biden, who most of whom have been bamfoobled and had the wool pull over their eyes just as much. But so there's that 30%, and they will believe this bullshit. But all the rest of us, the other 70%, we don't believe it. We know that the American empire has been doing some really shady shit. And as it declines, the shit that it does, it becomes shadier and shadier. Just as it becomes more reckless, just as it becomes more indiscriminately lashing out hitting from all sides, and hitting people, hitting even its friends. Yeah, it's an interesting thing it's an interesting story unfolding before us today, one we've never seen before because we've never lived through the collapse of a empire. So it'll be very interesting. Okay, that's it for tonight. Well, I do have a little bit more to say. I made a mistake and I crunched two stories together. The Putin Z alternative to Swift story and the Nord Stream 2 story from comments from Victoria Nuland. Fuck Europe. Remember her saying fuck Europe? She's a real winner. She's always got something up her sleeve that's pretty nasty. But anyway, she's also the person who was caught in a hacked phone conversation with the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, talking about how they were going to set up a puppet government after the Maidan riots in Ukraine, which totally exposed the U.S. role in Ukraine and in setting up the puppet government, the puppet fascist government that took the place of a legally elected government that was overthrown there in 2014, wasn't it? I think it was 2014. Anyway, Nuland has quite a history behind her. I just wanted to say the Swift story, you didn't comment on the Swift story because it was kind of crunched in with the Nuland Nord Stream 2 story. But the Swift story is quite significant. Russia and China creating their own alternative bank exchange and currency exchange system to compete with Swift. And this comes at the same time when there are threats, direct threats from the US Senate, from the United States government, to basically to sanction Russia from using Swift. So if China and Russia do carry this out in this year, in the year 2022, this is going to be a real game changer and really set the stage for a truly multipolar world, and set the stage for the definitive end of the unipolar world of the past that the U.S. empire ran.
Yes. Oh, I imagined it was over, but yeah, I was actually thinking about that, and it sounds like another big step towards the scenario I've been speculating about. I got this speculation from this Indian Marxist writer. His name goes something like Psyops by something, and he's been saying that within the next few decades, as China and Russia carve out a new financial order, this is going to allow for a new wave of socialist revolutions to occur within the exploited countries, or rather the countries that are going to not be exploited anymore and gain economic agency when China lifts them out of their dependence on imperialist countries.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think things are going to happen a lot faster than that, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm not talking about decades. I'm talking about years here. But that's I don't know. Maybe I'm just a bit over optimistic. I don't know. But just based on my objective analysis of what's going on right now, I think we're going to see big changes very quickly in the world. In years, not in decades. So that's about it for tonight. Unless you have anything else to add, we'll wrap it up. I want to thank you, Rainer, for all that you do. And also thank our listeners and viewers for tuning in. And please join us again next week when we'll have another episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review with Chris Driscoll and Rainer Shea. Until then, I bid you a sweet adieu.